the Purple Puppy sleep story for anyone who wants to listen to it. Jack the Rabbit.
Jack the Rabbit was covered in mud and bounding and jumping towards the forest. Jack and Penelope had been playing hide and seek, and Jack had hidden the pig pen, and he would have stayed hidden if it wasn't for his big ears. And then the farmer came out while they were playing in the mud, and Jack took off running. 'Cause Jack didn't want to be caught by the farmer. Jack liked to sneak in and steal carrots and celery from the farmer's garden. Jack was running towards the forest, covered in sticky, goopy, slimy mud. And all along the way, his feet were getting covered in leaves and sticks and grass, and maybe even a snail. He stopped once he got inside the forest and tried to shake the mud off, but it wouldn't go anywhere. It was too stuck. And then he tried to rub against a tree to rub the mud off, but it just smeared everywhere and wouldn't come off. And then Jack rolled around on the ground, but he just ended up covered in pine needles and pine cones. And now he was covered in mud, it was cold and itchy. So Jack decided he'd have to go to the river. And Jack made his way to the river. It was a long journey because he couldn't move very fast because he was covered in mud and pine needles and pine cones and sticks and a snail. But Jack finally made it to the river, where he saw his friend Bugsy. Bugsy the bunny was getting a drink of water by the river and turned to see one look at Jack, who said hello, and Bugsy screamed and jumped into the river and swam away, yelling, "Mud monster! Mud monster!" And Bugsy swam all the way to the other side of the river and bounded away. In 3 hops, he was gone out of sight. And Jack said to himself, "This will not do. I cannot be a mud monster forever." So Jack inched his way into the river. The water was very cold, especially around his feet, because rabbits' feet are very sensitive. He lowered himself into the water and began to scrub, and scrub, and scrub. And finally, eventually, the mud slowly started to loosen. There was a deer that wandered over to see what all the commotion was about. And the deer said, "Got stuck in the sticky mud, huh?" Jack said, "Yeah, and it's hard to get off." The deer gave out a snort. He said, "I hate it when the sticky mud won't come off. I suggest you find a rock and use a rock to scrub. It'll help get the mud off." And Jack felt around and found a rock and tried to scrub, but it was too pointy and stabby, and it did not help get the mud off. So he felt around for another rock and tried to use it, and it was too smooth. It just slid right over the mud and did not help the mud come off. And he fished around in the water and finally found the perfect rock. It was rough but wasn't pointy, and it was a nice oval shape that fit perfect in his hand. And he started scrubbing, and slowly but surely, it helped. the mud started drifting away down the river, making the pretty clear water this murky brown as it snaked its way down the river, tracing out the waves and the currents. And the fish moved hastily away from this cloud of mud as it drifted downstream. Jack thought it was funny to watch the fish dart around away from the mud cloud. He wondered if they also thought it was a mud monster. Jack spent a long time scrubbing and scrubbing until finally all the mud was gone. But now he was cold. From the tips of his ears to his fluffy little tail, he was freezing. So Jack got out of the river and bounded off towards his home in the blackberry patch. It is now mid-afternoon, 'cause scrubbing off thick mud out of fur takes a long time. And Jack got home to his mother. His mother said, "Why are you soaking wet?" And Jack explained that he was playing hide and seek, and that he hid in the pig pen and got covered in mud. His mother just shook her head and tisked at him. "Now, Jack, you know better than to go over on the farm. If that farmer catches you, you might become a stew." And Jack said, "I know, but I'm faster than the farmer. And Penelope is my friend. She wouldn't let the farmer make me a stew." And Jack's mother told him, "Now you go out and find a nice sunny spot to lay in to warm up and dry off before you catch a cold. Last thing I need is for you to get the sniffles and be sick." Especially with blackberry picking season coming up. Jack agreed and wandered out of the blackberry patch, admiring the beautiful red berries that were growing. Soon they would be turning black and be ready to eat, sweet and delicious. Jack wandered out of the blackberry patch, and he knew the perfect spot to go lay down in the sun. There was a patch of flat rocks, large, huge slabs of rocks, where the sun shone down on bright, because there were no trees growing through the rocks. So Jack made his way to this area, and there was a squirrel who was also laying in the sun. And he asked the squirrel if he could come lay next to him, and the squirrel agreed. And they laid in the sun, Jack turning occasionally, sometimes standing up and shaking, fluffing out his fur, so that he could get every little inch of himself dry and warm. The sun felt very good on Jack's fur. It warmed him all over. He could feel the warm sun radiating down into his skin and muscles and bones, warming him through and through. And he started to yawn. And all he could think about was his eyelids getting heavy, and how warm the sun felt, and how soft the leaves were on the rocks. And soon Jack fell asleep next to his new friend, a squirrel. Jack dreamt of pigs and fish and mud monsters before he finally woke up. He was nice and dry now, and still very warm from the sun, but the sun was starting to set, and Jack laid and looked up at the sky, watching all the beautiful colors the sky was turning as the sun was going down. Tonight, the sky was a special yellowy green, with streaks of purple. And soon, Jack stretched his legs and stretched his ears and flipped over onto his feet, where he took his time bouncing off back home to his mother, where he could settle into his own bed in his own little den that he had dug out, where he was the most comfortable. And he would spend the rest of the night curled up, warm and safe, maybe having more dreams of mud monsters and fish. The end.